Jake Martinez stared at the blue glow of his communication screen aboard the UES Horizon. The message from Admiral Lisa Harper had arrived 3 hours ago, but he still could not believe what it said. First contact. After decades of searching, the galaxy, something had finally found them first. The bridge of the Horizon was quiet except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Jake's crew of 32 men and women went about their duties with nervous energy. Everyone knew this day would change everything. Lieutenant Amy Foster walked up to Jake's command chair, her boots making soft clicks on the metal floor. "Sir, we're getting another transmission," Amy said. Her voice was calm, but Jake could see the excitement in her eyes. "It's not from Earth this time, it's from them." Jake nodded. "Put it through to the main screen." The view screen flickered and then showed something that made the entire bridge crew stop what they were doing. A tall, thin figure appeared on the screen. Its skin was pale blue and seemed to glow with its own light. It had large, dark eyes and no visible nose. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music mixed with wind chimes. "Greetings, humans of Earth," the being said. "I am High Counselor Theiss of the Villani people. We represent the Galactic Council, a union of 12 species that maintains peace across this sector of space. We have been watching your world for many cycles." Jake felt his mouth go dry. Watching them? For how long? He activated his own communication system. "This is Commander Jake Martinez of the United Earthship Horizon. We are honored to make contact with you and your council." Theiss tilted its head in what might have been a nod. "Commander Martinez, we must speak with your leaders urgently. A great danger threatens all life in this galaxy. We require assistance from every species, including yours." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Amy was the first to speak. "Sir, should we contact Earth Command?" "Already doing it," Jake replied, his fingers moving across his control panel. 2 days later, Captain Roy Blake sat in the diplomatic shuttle messenger as it approached the massive space station called Nexus 7. Roy had spent 20 years in the diplomatic corps, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Through the shuttle's windows, he could see the station growing larger. It looked like a crystal flower made of metal and light, spinning slowly in the darkness of space. "First time seeing alien architecture, Captain?" asked Dr. Helen Clark, the mission's science advisor. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, but Roy knew she had one of the sharpest minds on Earth. "First time seeing aliens at all," Roy admitted. "You?" Helen smiled. "I've been dreaming about this my whole life. Just never thought it would happen because we were being recruited for a war." Roy looked at the mission briefing again. The Galactic Council had been very clear about why they wanted human help. Something called the Void Swarm was destroying entire star systems. 17 different battles had been fought against them. 17 defeats. Now the Council was asking for help from every species they could find, including the newcomers from Earth. The shuttle docked with a soft bump. Roy straightened his dress uniform and checked his appearance one last time. Amy Foster, now wearing the formal uniform of a military attaché, stood beside him. "Remember," Roy said to his small team, "we're here to listen and learn. We don't know anything about galactic politics or warfare. We're the new kids in a very old school." The airlock opened with a hiss. Roy stepped through and immediately felt different. The gravity was lighter than Earth normal, and the air had a sweet smell that reminded him of flowers. The corridor they entered was made of some kind of smooth, white material that seemed to glow from within. 3 beings waited for them. Roy recognized Theiss from the transmission, but the other 2 were completely different. One looked like it was made of living crystal, changing colors as it moved. The other seemed to be wearing a suit filled with water, and Roy could see something swimming inside it. "Welcome to Nexus 7, Theiss said. "I am honored to meet the representatives of Earth. Please, follow me to the council chambers." As they walked through the station, Roy noticed something strange. Every alien they passed stopped what they were doing to stare at the humans. Some moved away from them. Others whispered to each other in languages that sounded like music or static or rushing water. "They seem afraid of us," Amy whispered. "I noticed that too," Roy replied quietly. The council chambers were enormous, with a dome ceiling that showed the stars outside. 12 different beings sat around a circular table that seemed to be made of solid light. Roy had studied the briefing materials, but seeing all these different life forms in person was overwhelming. This gestured for the humans to sit at a smaller table facing the council. "Before we begin," this said, "we must address something important. Your species comes from what we classify as a death world." Roy blinked. "A what?" "A death world," repeated the crystal being whose voice sounded like breaking glass. "A planet so dangerous that only the most resilient life forms could survive there. Your Earth has weather that kills, animals that hunt in packs, plants that are toxic, and gravity that would crush most of our people." The water suit being made bubbling sounds that the translation device turned into words. "Your oceans alone contain creatures that could destroy our largest vessels. Your land animals hunt for sport. Your weather systems have enough energy to power our cities for years." Roy looked at Amy, then back at the council. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Earth is just our home. It's not particularly dangerous." The silence that followed was so complete that Roy could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Thais spoke again. "Commander Blake, your people evolved in an environment where being injured means getting stronger, where facing death makes you fight harder, where protecting others is more important than protecting yourself. This is not normal in the galaxy." Another council member, who looked like a floating jellyfish made of light, pulsed different colors as it spoke. "Most species, when faced with superior numbers or weapons, surrender or retreat. This is logical. This is survival. But your species has a documented history of fighting harder when outnumbered, of choosing death over surrender, of sacrificing themselves for strangers." Roy felt a chill run down his spine. "And you want our help because of this?" "The Void Swarm cannot be reasoned with," this said. "They cannot be bargained with. They consume everything in their path. Every civilized response has failed. Perhaps it is time to try an uncivilized one." Amy leaned forward. "You're asking us to fight because you think we're naturally violent. We are asking you to fight because you are naturally survivors," the crystal being corrected. "Your entire species is what we would consider elite warriors. What you call ordinary humans, we call living weapons." Roy took a deep breath. He thought about Earth, about the billions of people who went about their daily lives never thinking of themselves as warriors or weapons. People who worried about paying bills and finding love and raising children. Ordinary people who just happened to come from a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. "We'll need to discuss this with our government," Roy said finally. "Of course," Thais replied. "But please understand, the swarm will reach this sector in less than 4 months. Time is not our ally." As the meeting ended and the humans were escorted to their quarters, Amy walked beside Roy in silence. Finally, she spoke. "Captain, do you think they're right? About us being different?" Roy looked out through a window at the peaceful station, around them, with its gentle lights and quiet corridors. Then he thought about Earth, with its hurricanes and earthquakes, its lions and sharks, its history of wars and heroes and people who chose to run toward danger instead of away from it. "Think," Roy said slowly. "We're about to find out." Colonel Ben Hayes stepped off the transport shuttle onto Kepler Station with his team of 40 Marines. The station was huge, built by the Galactic Council as a training facility for the coming war. Ben had fought in 3 Earth conflicts, but this was different. This time, humans would fight alongside aliens for the first time in history. The station's main corridor was wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side. The walls were made of the same glowing material Ben had seen on Nexus 7, but here it pulsed with different colors. Red meant training areas, blue meant living quarters, and green meant common areas where different species could meet. "Feels like being inside a rainbow," said Sergeant Katie Wells, walking beside Ben. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but Ben had seen her take down men twice her size in training. "Think the aliens will be able to keep up with us?" Before Ben could answer, a group of alien soldiers approached them. The leader was a Zephyrite, its crystal body shifting from blue to purple as it moved. Behind it came 3 Vylani soldiers, their pale skin glowing softly in the corridor light. Greetings, human warriors, the Zephyrite said, its voice like breaking ice. I am Commander Zex-9. We will be training together for the next 6 weeks. Ben saluted, though he was not sure if aliens understood the gesture. Colonel Ben Hayes, United Earth Marines. We're looking forward to working with you. Zex-9's body flickered yellow, which Ben hoped meant friendliness. We have prepared special training exercises. Please follow us to the combat simulation rooms. The training room was enormous, with walls that could project any environment. Right now it showed a ruined city with broken buildings and smoke rising from crater holes. Ben had seen places like this on Earth after earthquakes or wars. This scenario simulates an urban combat situation, Zex-9 explained. The enemy has superior numbers and weapons. The objective is to survive and extract to the evacuation point. Ben looked at the simulation. It seemed straightforward enough. What's the catch? There is no catch, said one of the Vylani soldiers. Survival is the only goal. When your health indicators drop below 50%, you must withdraw to medical stations for recovery. Katie raised her hand. What if the medical stations are overrun? The aliens looked at each other. Zex-9's body turned a confused orange color. That cannot happen. Medical stations are always placed in secure locations. But what if they're not secure anymore? Katie pressed. What if the enemy takes them? Then the exercise ends, the Vylani soldier said simply. No one can fight with serious injuries. Ben felt something click in his mind. These aliens had never fought a war where retreat was not an option. On Earth, humans had learned to fight even when wounded, even when surrounded, even when hope was gone. The simulation began. Ben's team of 10 Marines spread out through the ruined city, moving from building to building. The alien soldiers moved differently. They advanced slowly, always staying near cover, always ready to retreat. When the first enemy attack came, the difference became clear. The alien soldiers immediately pulled back when their shields dropped to 70%. They moved to defensive positions and called for support. The humans did something else entirely. Private Danny Murphy took a hit that knocked him down 3 floors when a building collapsed. Any alien would have been crushed, but Danny got up, shook off the debris, and kept fighting. His health indicator showed 30%, but he did not retreat. Murphy, you need medical attention, Ben called over the radio. I'm fine, sir, Danny replied, firing at enemy positions. Just got my bell rung a little. Katie Wells found herself surrounded by enemy units in a narrow alley. The simulation showed her health dropping as energy blasts hit her position. Instead of retreating, she did something that made the alien observers go silent. She charged. Katie ran straight at the enemy positions, firing as she moved. She took hits that would have disabled any alien soldier, but she kept going. When her weapon ran out of ammunition, she switched to her backup. When that ran out, she used her combat knife. The simulation ended when Katie reached the evacuation point, carrying 2 wounded alien soldiers who had frozen in panic when they saw her. Fighting style. How is this possible? Zex-9 asked, its crystal body flashing red with distress. She should have died 4 times in that scenario. Dr. Helen Clark, who had been observing the training, stepped forward with her data pad. Commander Zex-9, I've been studying the differences between human and alien physiology. What you consider fatal injuries, we consider moderate wounds. She showed them the readings from Danny's fall. Private Murphy survived an impact that generated 12 Gs of force. Your people would be liquefied by half that amount. Human bones are 3 times denser than Vylani bones. Our muscle tissue can function even when damaged. Captain Steve Rogers walked into the training room, still wearing his flight suit from the space combat exercises. His face was pale and his hands shook slightly. How did your training go? Ben asked. Steve sat down heavily in a chair. I think I broke their flight simulator. The alien pilots keep saying I'm trying to kill myself. What do you mean? They have safety protocols that won't let their ships pull more than 3 Gs of acceleration. I pulled 8 Gs in my first maneuver and their computer system started screaming warnings. Dr. Clark nodded. Human pilots routinely handle G-forces that would kill most galactic species. What we consider aggressive flying, they consider suicide attempts. Commander X9 approached Steve carefully. Pilot Rogers, why do you perform maneuvers that could destroy your vessel? Steve looked confused. They won't destroy my ship. I've pulled 12 Gs in Earth training. 8 is nothing. But the stress on your body, what stress? I feel fine. The alien's crystal body went through several color changes before settling on a dim blue. Your species does not understand the concept of limitations. Over the following weeks, the training exercises continued, and the differences became more obvious. Humans slept 4 hours a night and called it normal. Aliens needed 12 hours of rest. Humans ate food that would poison most galactic species and called it spicy. Humans exercised until their muscles hurt and called it fun. Sergeant Julie Kim demonstrated this during a survival exercise. The scenario placed teams in a hostile environment with limited supplies. The alien teams immediately began rationing their resources and looking for the quickest way to safety. Julie's team did something different. They started exploring. There might be water sources deeper in the cave system, Julie told her mixed human-alien team. We should check it out. The Vylani team member glowed with alarm. The caves are unmapped, we could become lost. So we leave markers as we go, Julie said simply. Look, sitting here and rationing water won't help us if there's a whole underground river 100 meters away. When the exercise ended, Julie's team had not only found water, but had also discovered an alternate exit route and several sources of food that the other teams had missed. The alien observers watched the humans with growing amazement and fear. These beings from the death world did not just survive in dangerous situations. They explored them. They found opportunities where others saw only threats. Lieutenant Bobby Evans summed it up during the final training briefing. I think I understand what's happening here, he said to the mixed group of human and alien soldiers. You guys have evolved to avoid danger. That makes sense, but we evolved to deal with danger. Earth threw everything it had at us for millions of years and we're still here. Commander X9's body flickered through several colors before responding. But how do you function with such constant stress? Bobby laughed. Stress? This isn't stress. Stress is when my little sister was born 3 months early and we didn't know if she'd make it. Stress is when my dad lost his job and we had to move in with my grandparents. This is just training. Amy Foster, now wearing the uniform of a Joint Forces coordinator, spoke up from the back of the room. We've been monitoring communications from the outer systems. The Void Swarm has been detected at the edge of Council space. They'll be here in 2 weeks. The room went quiet. The alien soldiers looked at each other with expressions that needed no translation. Fear. The humans looked different. They sat up straighter. Their eyes got brighter. Danny Murphy cracked his knuckles. Katie Wells checked her weapons one more time. Steve Rogers started calculating flight paths in his head. Finally, said Bobby Evans. I was getting bored with all this practice. Commander X9 stared at the humans in amazement. You are not afraid? Ben Hayes stood up and looked around the room at his people. Marines who had trained their whole lives for moments like this. Pilots who lived to test the limits of physics. Soldiers who had volunteered to fight aliens they had never seen for people they had never met. Of course we're afraid, Ben said quietly. Fear keeps you alive. But being afraid and being paralyzed are two different things. We've got 2 weeks to get ready for the fight of our lives. He looked directly at X9. The question is, are you ready to learn how Deathworlders fight? Admiral Nick Thompson stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance as the combined galactic fleet assembled at Rigel Prime. Through the massive viewing windows, he could see ships from 12 different species spread across space like a metal constellation. Crystal ships from the Zephyrite caught starlight and threw it back in rainbow patterns. The Vylani phase ships flickered in and out of reality like ghosts. The bioships of the depths pulsed with organic light. The human fleet was smaller than the others, only 50 ships compared to hundreds from each alien species. But Nick noticed something as he watched the formations. The alien ships stayed far apart from each other, maintaining safe distances. The human ships flew close together, their crews talking to each other on open channels like they were heading to a family reunion instead of the biggest battle in galactic history. Admiral, we're receiving the final briefing from High Counselor. This. said Captain Maria Lopez, his tactical officer. Maria had been with Nick for 10 years through 3 Earth conflicts and now this. She was a small woman with dark hair and scars on her hands from when their ship had been boarded by pirates near Mars. The main screen flickered and showed Thys, the pale blue Vylani leader. Behind him, Nick could see the command center of the Galactic Fleet, with representatives from all 12 species watching nervously. Fleet commanders, Thys began. Long-range sensors confirm the arrival of the Void Swarm at the outer edge of this system. We estimate contact in 6 hours. Remember, this enemy cannot be reasoned with. They exist only to consume. They have destroyed 17 civilizations before us. Nick studied the tactical display that appeared on screen. The Void Swarm looked like a living cloud of darkness, billions of individual creatures moving together with perfect coordination. Each creature was the size of a fighter ship, but they moved through space without any technology he could recognize. All ships will maintain formation and engage at maximum range, Thys continued. When shields drop below 50%, retreat to secondary positions. When shields drop below 20%, withdraw to the evacuation routes. Above all, preserve your ships and crews. We cannot afford to lose our fleet. The transmission ended. Nick looked around his bridge at his crew of 30 men and women. They had the same expression he had seen on human faces throughout history when someone told them something was impossible. "Sir," said Commander Lisa Santos from the fighter, Bay. "Permission to speak freely?" "Always, Lisa. That's not how we fight, is it, sir?" Nick smiled. Lisa Santos had been born on a mining station in the asteroid belt. She had learned to fly in ships held together with spare parts and good intentions. She had never backed down from a fight in her life. "No, Commander Santos, that's not how we fight." The first contact with the Void Swarm happened exactly as the previous 17 battles had. The enemy came as a wave of living darkness, moving faster than any ship in the Galactic Fleet. They hit the outer defense line like a tsunami hitting a beach. The Zephyrate crystal ships opened fire first, their energy weapons lighting up space with brilliant colors. For a few minutes, it looked like they were winning. Thousands of void creatures died in the first exchange, but for every one that died, 10 more took its place. The crystal ships began to crack under focused attacks. When their shields dropped to 50%, they retreated exactly as their doctrine required. The Vylani phase ships tried to use their ability to become temporarily intangible, but the void creatures seemed to exist partially outside normal space and could still damage them. Nick watched as ship after ship pulled back from the battle line. It was exactly what the briefings had described from the 17 previous defeats. Disciplined retreat in the face of overwhelming odds. "Admiral," called Major Chris Adams from his fighter cockpit. "Request permission to engage." Chris was leading the human fighter squadron. 20 pilots who had volunteered for what everyone knew was probably a suicide mission. Nick had tried to talk them out of it, but Chris had just smiled and said someone had to be first. "Permission granted, Major. Give them hell." The human fighters shot forward like bullets, cutting through the space between the main fleet and the Void Swarm. Nick watched on his tactical display as they flew straight into the enemy formation without slowing down. What happened next had never been seen in galactic warfare. When Chris's fighter took a direct hit that knocked out his shields and tore off his left wing, he did not retreat. Instead, he turned his damaged ship directly toward the largest cluster of void creatures and pushed his engines to maximum power. "This is Major Adams." Chris's voice came over the radio, calm despite the fact that his ship was coming apart around him. "Tell my wife I love her. Tell my kids their daddy fought the monsters and won." Chris's ship slammed into the void cluster and detonated his reactor. The explosion took out hundreds of enemy creatures and opened a gap in their formation. On the bridge of every alien ship in the fleet, crews stood in shocked silence. They had just watched a pilot deliberately destroy himself and his ship to damage the enemy. It was something that had never happened in their histories. "All human fighters, follow Adams's lead," Lisa Santos called over the radio. "Make every shot count. Make every life matter." The human fighters began attacking in ways that made no sense to alien observers. When their ships were damaged, they flew closer to the enemy, not farther away. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, They used their ships as weapons. Lieutenant Jenny Reed's fighter lost its engines but still had weapons. Instead of calling for rescue, she had her ship towed by another fighter right into the middle of a void formation, where she could do the most damage. Captain Tony Miller's destroyer took so much damage that any alien crew would have abandoned ship. Instead, Tony's crew sealed the hull breaches with spare metal and kept fighting. When they ran out of spare metal, they used their own uniforms and equipment. "Admiral," Maria Lopez said, looking at her tactical display with wide eyes. "The void formation is breaking up. They're not used to enemies that fight back when they're losing." Nick watched as the human ships began to change the nature of the battle. The void creatures had evolved to fight enemies that retreated when damaged. They had never faced enemies that became more dangerous when cornered. Sergeant Julie Kim led a boarding party onto a damaged void bioship that was still partially alive. Any alien crew would have declared such a mission impossible. But Julie's Marines had trained for urban combat and destroyed cities. Fighting inside a hostile alien organism was just another day at the office. "It's like being inside a really angry whale," Julie reported over the radio as her team planted explosive charges in what they hoped were vital organs. "Smells worse than that garbage processing plant back on Earth." The charges detonated, and the bioship broke apart. Other human teams began copying the tactic. Soon, boarding parties were attacking void creatures from the inside, while the fleet engaged them from outside. The tide of the battle began to turn when the alien crews saw something they had never witnessed before. Human ships with hull breaches and failing systems continued to fight. Human pilots with broken bones and bleeding wounds stayed at their posts. Human Marines fought in environments that would kill most galactic species instantly. Most importantly, humans kept protecting each other. When Private Danny Murphy saw a Vylani ship about to be destroyed, he flew his damaged fighter between it and the void attackers. He died saving aliens he had met only weeks before. When Captain Katie Wells realized that the enemy was about to break through to the medical ships where the wounded were being treated, she took her entire unit and held a position that could not be held. They died buying time for the medical ships to escape. One by one, the alien crews began to understand something their species had never learned. There were things worth dying for. A Zephyrite commander watched his human allies sacrifice themselves to protect his ship. Instead of retreating when his shields dropped to 50%, he stayed in the fight. His crystal body began to glow brighter as he pushed beyond what his people thought was possible. A Vylani pilot saw Jenny Reed fighting with a ship that had no engines. He used his phase abilities to get closer to the enemy than ever before, accepting risks that his training said were suicidal. All across the battlefield, alien crews began to fight like humans. Not because they had learned human tactics, but because they had learned what humans fought for. The Void Swarm, which had destroyed 17 civilizations, began to retreat for the first time in its existence. They had never faced an enemy that became stronger when facing extinction. They had never fought beings who valued others more than themselves. As the enemy formation collapsed and fled back into deep space, Nick Thompson looked around the bridge of the Defiance. His ship was held together with emergency patches and hope. Half his crew was wounded. They had lost more ships in one battle than Earth had lost in any previous conflict. But they had won. "Admiral," Maria Lopez said quietly, "we're receiving signals from the alien fleet. They want to know how we knew to fight like that." Nick thought about his answer for a long moment. How do you explain to beings who evolved in safe environments that courage is not the absence of fear but action in spite of fear? "Tell them," Nick said finally. "That's just how Deathworlders fight." General Paul Martinez stood in the command center of the assault ship UES Hammer, watching the tactical display that showed the Void Nexus ahead of them. The massive structure was the size of a small moon, covered in organic growths that pulsed with dark energy. This was where the Void Swarm was born, and no military force in galactic history had ever gotten close to one. Paul was Jake Martinez's older brother, but where Jake explored the unknown, Paul fought it. He had commanded ground forces in the Mars Rebellion and the Europa mining conflicts. Now he was leading the first assault on a Void Nexus, and everyone knew it was probably a one-way trip. "General, the alien fleet commanders are requesting another," Strategy meeting, said Captain Tony Miller, his tactical officer. Tony's face was covered in bandages from the battle at Rigel Prime, but he had refused medical leave. They want to discuss safer approaches to the target. Paul looked at the display showing their combined fleet. After the victory at Rigel Prime, volunteers from every galactic species had joined the assault force, but Paul could see they were still thinking like their old selves. The alien ships hung back at safe distances, their formations designed for retreat. "Tell them the meeting is canceled," Paul said. "We attack in 2 hours." Dr. Rachel Stone, the mission's xenobiologist, looked up from her research station. "General, I think I've found something important. The Nexus has a central control chamber, about 2 kilometers inside the structure. If we can destroy it, the entire swarm network might collapse. How do we get 2 kilometers inside something that's actively trying to kill us?" Rachel smiled, but it was not a happy expression. "We walk." The assault began with the human fleet doing something that made the alien observers think they had lost their minds. Instead of staying at long range and bombarding the Nexus, the human ships flew directly toward it. Commander Lisa Santos led the fighter squadrons straight into the organic surface of the Nexus, her ships disappearing into tunnel-like openings that sealed behind them. On the alien command ships, crew members watched in horror as the humans vanished into what looked like the mouth of a giant predator. "They're flying into its stomach," whispered a Zephyrite commander. "They'll be digested alive." But the humans had not come to play it safe. They had come to win. Inside the Nexus, Lisa's fighters found themselves flying through tunnels made of living tissue that tried to close around them. The walls secreted acid that would have dissolved any normal ship in minutes. But human ships were built on Earth, where everything was designed to survive in hostile environments. "This is like flying through a really angry throat," Lisa reported over the radio. Her voice calm despite the fact that her fighter was being attacked by antibodies the size of cars. "Julie, you reading this?" Sergeant Julie Kim's voice came back, from deeper in the Nexus. "Copy that, Commander. It's worse down here. The walls are trying to eat my Marines." Julie was leading a ground assault team through the internal passages of the Nexus. They wore environmental suits that could handle the acid and crushing pressures inside the organic structure. Any alien species would have declared the mission impossible. But Julie's team had trained in the deep ocean trenches of Earth, where the pressure was just as deadly and the environment just as hostile. "Private Murphy, stop playing with the local wildlife," Julie called to Danny Murphy, who was using his combat knife to fight off creatures that looked like giant bacteria with teeth. "They started it, Sergeant," Danny replied, stabbing something that screamed and dissolved. "Besides, I think they're kind of cute." The alien commanders watching the mission data could not understand what they were seeing. The humans were treating the interior of the Nexus like a difficult hiking trail instead of a death trap. Captain Tony Miller's assault ship broke through the outer defenses and began landing troops directly on the Nexus surface. The organic ground tried to absorb the landing craft, but Tony's engineers had welded metal spikes to the landing gear. When the ground tried to digest the ship, it just gave itself indigestion. "Beachhead secured," Tony reported. "Deploying ground teams." Lieutenant Bobby Evans led his demolition squad across the surface of the Nexus, planting charges on what Rachel Stone had identified as nerve clusters. The surface kept trying to shake them off like a dog getting rid of fleas, but Bobby's team just held on tighter. "It's like trying to do surgery on an earthquake," Bobby said, attaching another explosive to a pulsing growth. "Good thing we brought the big bombs." Inside the Nexus, Julie's team had found the central control chamber. It was a vast space filled with organic computers that looked like giant brains connected by miles of nerve tissue. In the center was something that hurt to look at directly, a mass of living darkness that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. "Found the brain," Julie reported, requesting permission to give it a headache. "Permission granted," Paul replied from the command ship. "Make it hurt." What happened next changed everything the galaxy knew about warfare. Julie's team did not just plant bombs and retreat. They stayed in the control chamber, fighting off the Nexus's defenses while manually triggering each explosive charge. They knew they would not survive, but they also knew that someone had to make sure the job got done. The Nexus began to convulse as the explosions tore through its nervous system. All across the galaxy, Void swarm creatures suddenly stopped their attacks and began flying in random directions, their connection to the hive mind severed. But the most important moment came when Private Danny Murphy, bleeding and exhausted, made a discovery that no one expected. "Sergeant," Danny said, his voice filled with wonder, "I don't think these things are evil. I think they're scared." Julie looked at the organic computers around them. Now that the central intelligence was damaged, she could see something she had missed before. The entire Nexus was not a weapon. It was a shelter. "Command, you need to hear this," Julie said over the radio. "The Void Swarm isn't trying to destroy the galaxy. They're running from something that scares them so much they consume entire worlds just to build bigger hiding places." Dr. Rachel Stone's voice came over the radio from the research ship. "Julie, get out of there now. The whole structure is collapsing." "Negative, Doctor. We need to document this. Other species need to know that the swarm can be reasoned with. They're not monsters. They're refugees." The alien fleet commanders listened in amazement as Julie's team continued their research even as the Nexus died around them. These humans were willing to sacrifice their lives not just to win the battle, but to understand their enemy. In the end, only half of Julie's team made it out alive, but they brought with them information that would change how the galaxy viewed the Void Swarm. They were not an enemy to be destroyed, but a problem to be solved. Captain Tony Miller coordinated the evacuation as the Nexus collapsed. His ship was the last to leave, and he stayed behind to make sure every human survivor was accounted for. When the alien commanders asked why he risked his life for soldiers who were not even under his command, Tony looked confused. "They're humans," he said simply. "That makes them family." As the combined fleet returned to friendly space, the alien crews found themselves changed by what they had witnessed. They had watched humans fight not just with courage, but with compassion. Even in the middle of the most desperate battle in galactic history, the Deathworlders had tried to understand their enemy instead of simply destroying it. Commander X9 of the Zephyrite approached General Paul Martinez as the fleets prepared to separate. "General Martinez," the crystal being said, its body glowing with colors that indicated deep respect. "My people have a question. How do you fight so hard for beings you barely know?" Paul thought about his answer for a long moment. He thought about Julie Kim dying in the Nexus to save information that might help future generations. He thought about Danny Murphy fighting acid-breathing bacteria because someone had to. He thought about his brother Jake out there somewhere in the dark, still exploring the unknown. "Commander X9, Paul said finally, "we don't fight for strangers. There are no strangers. There are just people we haven't met yet." The alien commanders' body shifted through a dozen colors before settling on a warm gold. "Your species has much to teach us." "And yours has much to teach us," Paul replied. "That's what makes us stronger together." As the human fleet headed back toward Earth, carrying the wounded and the stories of the dead, Paul looked out at the stars and wondered what Jake would think of all this. His little brother had wanted to explore the galaxy and make friends with aliens. Well, Paul thought, mission accomplished, though he probably had not expected it to happen quite like this. The war was not over. There were still Void Swarm creatures scattered across the galaxy, still frightened and dangerous, but now they knew these creatures could be talked to, could be helped, could be turned from enemies into allies. It was the most human thing imaginable, taking the scariest problem in the galaxy and turning it into an opportunity to help someone. "General," Captain Tony Miller said from his station, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Thompson. The Galactic Council wants to meet with us again." Paul smiled. "Tell them we'll be there. And Tony?" "Yes, sir." "Tell them we're bringing our own chairs this time." Ambassador Ellen Wright stood in the main assembly hall of the rebuilt Galactic Council station, looking out at representatives from 14 different species. 6 months ago, there had been 12 species in the council. Now there were 14, because the Void Swarm had been split into 2 new member civilizations after humans figured out how to communicate with them. Ellen was a career diplomat who had spent 20 years negotiating treaties on Earth. She was used to difficult conversations, but nothing had prepared her for trying to explain human behavior to beings who still could not understand why her species chose to run toward danger instead of away from it. The proposal before us today, Ellen said to the assembly, is to establish joint training programs between human military units and galactic defense forces. The purpose is to share tactical knowledge and improve coordination for future threats. Hi. Counselor Thiss of the Vilani raised one glowing hand. Ambassador Wright, with respect, we are not certain our people can survive human training methods. We have received reports of your soldiers exercising until their bodies break down, then continuing to exercise. Ellen smiled. Counselor Thiss, we call that Tuesday. The confused silence that followed was broken by Commander Zex-9 of the Zephyrite, whose crystal body was now permanently tinted with gold in honor of the human soldiers who had died saving his ship at Rigel Prime. The Zephyrite Empire formally supports this proposal, Zex-9 announced. We have 47 volunteers who wish to train with human forces. They understand the risks. What risks? Asked Captain Joe Harrison, the human military liaison. Joe had been promoted after leading the first mixed human-alien fleet in the cleanup operations after the Nexus battle. We're just going to teach them basic tactics. Captain Harrison, said the representative from the depths, speaking through her water-filled translation suit. Your basic tactics include fighting while seriously injured, operating in environments that would kill most species, and sacrificing individual units to protect the whole. These are not basic tactics. These are legendary abilities. Joe looked around the assembly with confusion. But that's just common sense. If you're hurt, but can still fight, you keep fighting. If the environment is dangerous, you adapt to it. If your friends are in trouble, you help them. How else would you do it? The alien representatives looked at each other with the expression that had become common whenever humans spoke. It was a mixture of admiration, confusion, and mild terror. Dr. Frank Lee, the head of interspecies relations, stood up from his seat in the observation section. Frank had been studying the psychological effects of human contact on other species for the past 6 months, and his findings were remarkable. If I may address the council, Frank said, we've documented some interesting changes in galactic civilization since the war ended. Ellen nodded for him to continue. Zephyrite crystal formations have increased in density by an average of 15%. Vilani phase duration has extended beyond previously recorded limits. The depths have begun exploring ocean trenches they once considered impossibly dangerous. Every species that fought alongside humans has begun pushing beyond what they thought were their natural limitations. A young Vilani in the observation gallery raised her hand. Dr. Lee, is it true that humans climb mountains for recreation? Some of us do, yes. Mountains that could kill you? Well, that's what makes it fun. The young Vilani's glow brightened with what Frank had learned was excitement. Could you teach me? Before Frank could answer, Thiss spoke sharply in the Vilani language. The young one's glow dimmed, but she continued to stare at Frank with obvious interest. Counselor Thiss, Ellen said carefully. Is there a problem? Ambassador Wright, your species has begun to influence our young people. They ask about extreme sports and dangerous hobbies. They want to try spicy food. Some have even begun watching your horror entertainment programs for pleasure. Ellen tried not to smile. And this is bad because they are asking questions we cannot answer. Questions like, why don't we explore the deep caves? And what would happen if we tried to phase through a star? And can we make our food taste like fire? Colonel Nancy Davis, who ran the Galactic Military Academy that had been established on Earth, stepped forward. Counselor, if I may, we've had over 300 alien cadets train at our academy in the past 6 months. Not one of them has been seriously injured. But they have been changed, Thiss said quietly. They return to their homeworlds different, stronger, more willing to take risks, more willing to help others, even strangers. Again, Ellen said, this is bad because... The assembly fell silent. Finally, the representative from the floating mines, a species that existed as pure energy, spoke in a voice like singing wind. It is not bad, Ambassador Wright. It is terrifying. For millions of years, our species have lived by the principle that survival requires avoiding danger. Your species has shown us that survival requires embracing danger. This changes everything we thought we knew about existence." Captain Steve Rogers, who now led the integrated starfighter program, raised his hand. "If I could add something, we've been training mixed crews for 3 months now. The alien pilots who train with us aren't becoming reckless. They're becoming confident. There's a difference." "Explain this difference," requested Commander X9. "Reckless means taking stupid risks because you don't understand the danger. Confident means taking calculated risks because you understand the danger and know you can handle it." "We're not teaching your people to be stupid. We're teaching them to be brave." A new voice spoke from the back of the assembly. It came from one of the former Void Swarm creatures, now calling themselves the Wanderers. They had learned to communicate through a combination of musical tones and color changes. "The humans showed us something we had forgotten," the Wanderer sang. "They showed us that being afraid and being alive are not the same thing. We had been afraid for so long that we forgot how to live." Ellen looked around the assembly at faces and forms representing billions of beings across the galaxy. 6 months ago, these species had been preparing to lose a war against an unstoppable enemy. Now they were debating whether it was safe to let their children learn human games. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various other classifications," Ellen said formally, "I think we need to address the real issue here. You're not afraid of our training programs or our military tactics. You're afraid that your people might start acting like humans." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when someone says exactly what everyone is thinking, but no one wants to admit. Finally, the young Villani in the observation gallery spoke up again. "Is that really so terrible?" Her elder, This, looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly his glow began to shift to a warmer color. "Perhaps," This said quietly, "it is time for us to find out." The vote was unanimous. The joint training programs were approved along with student exchange programs, cultural sharing initiatives, and something that humans had suggested called adventure tourism for species that wanted to experience mild danger in controlled environments. As the assembly broke up, Ellen found herself standing next to the observation window, watching ships from 14 different species preparing to depart. But now they flew differently. The rigid formations had given way to more flexible patterns. Ships flew closer together, their crews talking to each other across species lines. Dr. Frank Lee joined her at the window. "Ellen, I've been thinking about something. What if we weren't the scary ones? What if we were just the first ones brave enough to show everyone else what they were capable of?" Ellen watched a young Zephyrite pilot perform a maneuver that would have been considered impossible for his species 6 months ago. His crystal body glowed with colors that his people had never seen before, colors that meant joy and excitement, and the thrill of pushing beyond limits. "Frank," Ellen said, "I think you might be right. We didn't conquer the galaxy. We inspired it." Above them, through the station's transparent dome, the stars shone with the same light they always had. But now, for the first time in galactic history, every species in the Council was looking at those stars not as distant points of light to avoid, but as destinations to explore. The galaxy had learned the most human lesson of all. The only difference between surviving and thriving is choosing what's worth reaching for, even if it might be dangerous. And everywhere, on worlds throughout known space, children of a dozen species looked up at the night sky and asked the question that had driven humans since they first stood upright and wondered what was beyond the horizon. What's out there, and how do we get to it? The moment Deathworlders entered battle, the galaxy had stood still. Now, 6 months later, the galaxy was finally ready to move forward.